Pushing frame generation past 2 times usually makes games feel worse, not better. On paper, higher multipliers look incredible. The frame rate counter explodes, the graph goes vertical, and everything sounds like a win. But in practice, once you go past that point, the base frame rate drops as more work is pushed into synthesis. Input starts to feel disconnected, and whatever visual smoothness you gained gets paid for in perceived input latency. This isn't either theory or benchmarking gymnastics, it's what happens when you actually play games with it enabled. But big numbers don't mean much if controls feel soft or delayed, especially on keyboard and mouse. So when frame generation keeps getting pushed harder as a headline feature, I think it's worth slowing down and asking what's actually improving and what's quietly getting worse. 2 times frame gen is great in my opinion, especially if your base frame rate sits above 60 anyway. The reason 2x works as well as it does is simple. You still have a solid native frame rate doing most of the heavy lifting. Frame generation is just filling in the gaps, smoothing motion, and making movement feel cleaner without completely hijacking the experience. The latency is still anchored to something that feels responsive. Once you push past that, the balance starts to break. The system is doing more prediction, more synthesis, more interpolation, and the native frames start carrying less weight. You might see 200 or 250 frames per second on screen, but the game underneath no longer feels like it's running anywhere near that. It feels floaty, inputs land late, the connection between your hands and the screen gets weaker. And this isn't a low-end problem. The hardware almost doesn't matter here. I'm on a 5090 and anything above 2x still feels absolutely awful to play. And that's even on a controller. That's the part that gets lost in the marketing. Frame generation doesn't erase latency, it masks it visually. If the base frame rate drops too far, you don't feel like you're playing at high refresh rate anymore. You feel like you're steering something with a delay built in, and no amount of smooth animation can fix that. This is why I get uneasy when higher and higher frame generation multipliers are treated like obvious progress. Because if the selling point becomes look how high the number goes rather than look how consistent and responsive this feels, we are optimizing for the wrong thing, aren't we? That skepticism becomes even stronger once you zoom out a bit and look what's happening around the hardware itself. GPUs are getting more expensive, memory is getting more expensive, supply is tighter, and priorities have shifted. Gaming is no longer the center of gravity it used to be. High margin compute, enterprise workloads, anything tied to AI, that's where the real money is now, unfortunately. In that context, it makes sense that the story leans harder on features that scale perception without scaling cost in the same way. Frame generation is attractive because it makes performance look explosive without requiring the same leap in raw rendering power. It's efficient, it demos well, and it looks real nice on a slide, bolstering the rest of your PPT to sell, how do I phrase this in a non-aggressive way, an increasingly convenient narrative, let's go with that. But efficiency for the vendor isn't the same thing as quality for the user, obviously. If improvements are focused on things like image stability, reduced ghosting, cleaner edges, and better temporal behavior, that's genuinely valuable. Those are the kinds of changes you feel immediately without sacrificing control. They make games look better and play the same. Where it starts to feel shaky is when the experience itself gets traded away for the illusion of speed. When responsiveness becomes negotiable and the expectation shifts from this feels good to play to this looks smooth enough if you don't think about it too hard. And that's the crossover point between all of this. Rising prices, tighter supply, heavy emphasis on AI adjacent features, and increasingly aggressive frame generation all point in the same direction. Not necessarily malicious, although most likely. Not some grand conspiracy, definitely not in my opinion. Just a set of incentives that don't always line up with what end users actually value moment to moment. I'm not anti-frame generation. Used carefully, it's great. I'm not anti-progress either, I clearly like cutting-edge tech. But I am skeptical of progress that mostly shows up in an overlay, while the feel of the game quietly degrades underneath it. Because at the end of the day, I don't buy hardware to admire a number. I buy it so the games I play look and perform as good as possible. If pushing past 2x breaks that contract, then I don't care how impressive the counter looks. It's not an upgrade, it's a compromise I didn't ask for. But let me know what you think of the current state of GPU and RAM prices, the push towards subscriptions and renting cloud-based computers, and if you believe that the AI bubble will burst in the near future. It will burst, sure, but not necessarily tomorrow, so we might have to deal with this for quite some time to come. If you don't feel like writing anything, just drop some computer, fire, and money emojis in that order in the comments to let me know that you watched the video all the way to the end. I'd appreciate it. And I will also respond with emojis myself. What a USP. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.